Hello, everyone, and welcome to PNP Live. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose, and I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I'm pleased to welcome our guests this evening, Nora Shalaway Carpenter, Vita Bybee, Randy DuBurke, and Mary Quattlebaum. You can buy your copy of Rural Voices, 15 Author Challenged Assumptions About Small Town America, by clicking on the link in the chat box. If you have a question for our guests, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the chat, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also vote on questions you like and want answered most. Now, onto the event that you're waiting for. Nora Shalaway Carpenter grew up on a mountain ridge deep in the West Virginia wilderness. She is a graduate of Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA in Writing for Children and Adults program and the author of YA novel The Edge of Anything and the picture book Yoga Frog. Before she wrote books, she worked as the associate editor of Wonderful West Virginia and is a certified yoga teacher. She currently lives in Asheville, North Carolina with her family. Vita Bybee grew up in a military household, collecting passport stamps and dreaming of castles in far-off places. She has been writing and drawing since she was 7 years old. A former journalist, she has an MFA in creative writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She lives with her family in the Mountain West. Born in Washington, Georgia, Randy DuBurke has been a professional illustrator for more than 20 years. He is known as the author and illustrator for the Steptoe award-winning book, The Moon Ring, and the illustrator of Yummy, The Last Days of Southside Shorty. He previously worked as a comic book artist for DC Comics, Marvel Comics, the New York Times, and many additional entertainment companies and publishing houses. Nora, Veeda, and Randy are joined in conversation tonight with Mary Quattlebaum, who is a children's author, a writer for the Washington Post Kids Post, and a friend of our Children and Teens department. And now I will turn things over to them.
Great, thank you so much, Heidi, for that lovely introduction. Thank you also to Margaret, who's working the tech for Politics and Prose back behind the scenes for tonight's event, and welcome to all of our audience. Nora, Veeda, and Randy, I have to say I am so excited to talk to you tonight about Rural Voices. And when I was asked to sort of be in conversation with you all, I was especially thrilled because I grew up in the country myself in King George, Virginia. It's now kind of an outlying suburb of Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia, but at the time it was very rural and full of family farms. The media is always trying to define or explain or better understand, you know, the rural American, as if there were only one rural experience. But what I so enjoyed about Rural Voices was that you showcase the multiplicity of rural experiences, and you kind of, you know, show our readers that rural spaces are everywhere, from Alaska to Texas. So Nora, you're the editor and you're the one that sort of brought together these 15 contributors. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea for this anthology and why you felt it was so important to bring it forward? And then there's a third part to that question. Okay. You know, when you came up with the idea and you were starting to pitch it to publishers, what kind of a response did you get? Okay, take it away, Nora.
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Mary. So the idea first came up a number of years ago when kind of there was an anthology boom in the YA market. More and more anthologies were coming out, and I was really, I kept always kind of holding my breath, like being like, okay, now it's going to be like the one that talks about rural people, you know, now it's going to be like there were all of these different, and there just never was. And that really came to the forefront with the election 4 years ago, where I felt like when Donald Trump was elected, there was, I felt like a lot of people were like, well, it's the rural people, you know, and they're this one, you were seeing this one type of image, this one person constantly. And I was just like, no, like, and then Hillbilly Elegy came out and I was like, no, like this, no, this is just not, you know, there's just so many other kinds of experiences. And I talk about this in the acknowledgements of the book, but I was working just at a coffee shop with two of my writer friends. One was in from Chicago actually visiting us, and we were just talking around, and I was just kind of like, I'm so tired of rural people being portrayed this way and being like laughed at, like I had to grow up with it, and I know other people that feel the same way, and I just wish that there was an anthology about rural people. And one of my friends was just like, well, why don't you do it? And at first I was kind of like, I couldn't do it, like, how would I even do that? And she was just like, well, you should just, just see what your agent says. And so it just kind of happened. Like, I texted a couple people and messaged a couple people from VCFA that I knew were rural and were passionate about it, and they were super excited. And my agent was super excited. And so she was like, well, she said, well, I guess we'll have to put a proposal together, put a proposal. And neither of us had done an anthology before, so we didn't really know what to do. But we just kind of figured it out, and it got a super response from editors. When we first put the proposal out there, and it was just the proposal and kind of like a list of like, here are people we could ask, because we didn't really know. And so we had lots of interest, but everyone was like, well, we need like stories and like people to sign on, and so we went back and we got a couple people to write stories and partials to sell, and it actually sold pretty quickly. There was one editor, Kaylin Adair, who was interested from the very beginning, and she bought it pretty fast. And we did have other interest, but Kaylin, the editor, is also rural, and we really clicked, kind of like our styles and everything. And the other people would have been great to work with too, but I really think it worked out for the best.
Well, that's so exciting. And obviously, you were the perfect person to bring it forward, Nora, at the perfect time, because, here we are in another election year, and people are trying to figure out, how is the rural American thinking these days? And you can kind of share, again, this multiplicity of experiences and points of view. And it's also exciting to see that publishing recognized pretty quickly that there was this huge gap. Nobody is writing stories from this perspective or sharing the broader perspectives.
There is one thing I will say. We did have some editors, so we had enthusiasm from a lot of people. We did have a couple people right away say, I personally really like this project, but I don't think anyone will care. Like, like about.
And now they're wrong.
I know, like, that's the whole point, which is one of the things that we're still trying to push about or push against. I mean, I even saw somebody posted on a Bookstagrammer posted about Rural Voices today, and she asked, what do you know about rural America? And so many of the tags that came in, their comments were just like, I don't know anything. And it was just like, it was just really
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. For someone that has grown up with it, and it's like such a part of my identity, it's just really weird to see kind of people just casually be like, I don't know, and I don't really think about it or care.
Yeah.
Well,
let's hear from Vita and Randy, because of course Nora contacted you all. So Vita, what did you think, when Nora contacted you? Did you think to yourself, I have a story immediately, or did it take you a little while to come up with one? Yeah, you first, Vita, and then we'll turn to you, Randy.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I am just so, I think having a collection of short stories is the perfect way to show this diversity of rural voices. There's 15 different authors, and we all come from different backgrounds. And one thing I'm really passionate about is having the Asian American voice, and so often in TV shows and in books, Asian Americans are often like not even a side character, but like a background character. And having this anthology where all voices are like, my short story, my characters are the center character. And that was really important to me. And so when I was thinking about the story I wanted to write, I thought of my family in Idaho, who I just adore and love them. They are, my grandfather would drive 3 hours from the small town Idaho to help me move when I was moving in college. You know, it was just no question. And I know how big their hearts are, and I know, you know, it's often portrayed in a certain way. And so I was really excited to have what it was like for me, you know, growing up in that time and under those circumstances too. And I was able to use, you know, it's not autobiographical, you know, but I was able to use some parts of my own life in the stories, and that really meant so much. And I had just the best time writing it, and it was so great working, you know, with Nora and with Candlewick, and it was, yeah, so it was great.
Yeah. Would you take just a moment and briefly describe your story? Don't give away the ending,
Okay.
but just briefly describe it. And I have to tell you, Vita, that your story really resonated with me. My husband is Asian American. He went to a high school, and his family and another family, they were the only Asian American families in this high school. And so he was constantly having experiences similar to your character, where people were always mixing them up or thinking they were related.
Right, yeah. So I grew up in a military family, so we moved around a lot. And most of the time I was one of the few Asians. And I'm sure if you haven't had that experience, you probably do have an experience where you felt like the minority in some certain places. But, you know, I was thinking of this experience when we were my family was living in Japan at the time. And we were out in the malls, and I was with my sisters and my mom, and we were like, hey, we should have some sushi because we're in Japan. And my mom was like, oh, I hate fish. And I was thinking, like, it just really like caught me off guard. I was just thinking, I kind of realized this because we just didn't grow up eating fish. And it was this thing where I was just kind of blown away, and I asked her why. And she told me the story of how when she first moved to Idaho, her new father-in-law would, you know, give her fish. And I don't want to, you know, I'm basing a lot of my story off of this, but it was just this, you know, this misunderstanding and just this thing that she didn't know how to say. And I was able to, like, you know, use this experience with my mom into the story, and how, you know, there's like these small stereotypes that we have. And like, even me, I thought, like, why don't you like fish? You know, we're Asian, but we are just because we're Asian doesn't mean we like everything, you know? So there's just these things, which I think sometimes are just misunderstandings or ways we can clear things up. And so yeah, so I was able to use that in the story. And so my short story is called Fish and Fences, and it kind of shows this facet of how we communicate, but also, you know, misunderstandings and just ways to come together. And I think, yeah, I'm just really glad I got to have it in the collection here.
Yes, that was great. And Randy, it was thrilling to see your story because you gave us a graphic story. So we have words, and we also have the images. And it was, you know, so exciting, not just to imagine what, you know, the grandparents look like, but to actually see them on the page and the expressions and the grandfather in the photographs. So I wonder if you'll, you know, tell us a little bit about, you know, the inspiration for your story, and like just briefly describe it.
Yeah, well, my story is called Grandpa, and this is actually a story that did happen to me as I was coming up. The first 4 years, I was born in Washington, Georgia. In the first 4 years, I lived in Tignor, Georgia with my mother's parents. And that was because my mother and father were living in Brooklyn at the time. They had an apartment, but it wasn't big enough for a child. So I stayed with my grandparents for the first 4 years. And they had a little farm, some cows, horses, chickens, and my grandfather was also a preacher. And he always used to call me Mr. DuBurke. Mr. DuBurke, what are you doing today, Mr. DuBurke? You're gonna come with me now. Come on, Mr. DuBurke. And so, and I loved him. He was about 6'4". So, you know, I'm like a little 2-3-year-old, you know, looking up to this huge man. And he was just so gentle and so nice. And I really loved being down there. And behind the house, there were the woods. And I used to love going into the woods and playing in the woods and in the lake. And there were some other kids who were around there. And we would ride the bikes through there and have sword fights and space battles and all of that stuff. So it really helped to foster my imagination.
Yeah.
And so when Nora had gotten in contact with me about contributing to the book, I have to admit, when I first got the email, I sort of like half read it, and I said, okay, yeah, she wants me to do something. Okay, fine. And at the time, I was finishing off another project, so I put it on the back burner. Then, like a month or two later, I got another email from Nora and said, "Oh, so what happened to that story you were supposed to be doing?" And I said, "Oh crap, what story? Oh, right." And so as I said, I think I sort of half read it. I knew it was supposed to be about, the time when I was in Georgia. So I did like a 4 or 5 page piece, which took place when I was like 4 or 5 years old, right? 3 or 4. And I sent it in, and then a few days later, I got an email from Nora, and she said, "This is a nice story, but we're going for an older group. So is there anything that happened to you when you were sort of like a teenager that would fit into this?" So I said, okay. And then I got serious and I sat down, and I remembered there was the incident, which was when I was about 15 years old. And I was living in Brooklyn at the time for about 11 years. And my parents were working. I think my brother was on some field trip. And so it turned out that I was the only one who could go down south to see my grandmother. And it had been a couple of years since then. And my mother was saying, "Oh, you should go down there. You should see her. We can't go, but you should make an appearance." And so I just said, "Oh, okay, I guess." And so I went down there, and I saw my mother, my grandmother, and my uncle, my mother's youngest brother, because he was still living in the house. And at that time, I was a bit unsure. I mean, I wanted to be an artist because I had told my mother when I was 6, "Oh, I'm going to be an artist." I told my grandfather when I was 4, "I'm going to write these books. I'm going to be an artist." I liked Star Trek and I think Wild Wild West and all this stuff from the 60s and the Tarzan show. And so I was going to write these stories. But when I was up in Brooklyn, I would do these pieces, and some of the kids there were like, "Oh, this is not so good. Oh, I know somebody who can draw way better than you. You can't really." And at the time, I was really unsure. And so when I went down south, I wasn't all that thrilled about it. But when I got there, I started to remember a lot of the stuff. Particularly, my grandmother had brought out some of these, which thankfully they've disappeared now. But I had done like a bunch of drawings that she had kept in a shoebox, and all of a sudden I started to remember all of these ideas that I had and what I wanted to do. And then I met a friend who I knew from years ago, and he started talking about the stories. And next thing I know, I really started to get energized again. And the funny thing was that as I started working on the story, the story sort of happened at a similar time now, because I was sort of getting burned out. I had just, like I said, finished off a project. I was kind of tired. But then as I was working on this, it sort of re-energized me. And I started to think, oh yeah, this is what I like doing. This is why I like doing this stuff. And so the story sort of fed me again.
That's
remembering
wonderful,
it.
Randy. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Nora's request to you was kind of a boon. Like it
Yes.
re-energized you artistically,
Really.
but it also gave you a chance to revisit, that time from your teenage years. And when I looked at your story, Randy, and read it and looked at the graphics, I could feel that it must have been a labor of love. Like there was so much expression in the face of the grandmother that's depicted, and the atmospheric quality of the woods, you know, that sort of special but almost mystical, magical place that you grew up with.
Yeah.
So let's see. I wanted to read this one part. So the flap jacket of the book mentions that, and I'm going to quote this: rural people and culture have often been casually mocked, stereotyped, and deeply misunderstood. So do you feel that that's been true for you at any point in your life? I know, Nora, you sort of mentioned that, and I know it was something that I wrestled with when, you know, I got older and I went to college and I, you know, moved up to Washington, D.C. Like I kind of hid that part of myself. Like I didn't talk about chickens or goats or like milking cows or putting up hay until I really had gotten to know somebody well. And I didn't feel that they would, you know, tease me or mock me for being a hayseed. Now I don't care, everybody knows. But you know, is this something that any of you have wrestled with? Vita, why don't you start us off?
Sure. You know, one of the places I grew up was also in Northern Virginia, and our town was in, I'm not sure if it was rural, but it's like, it's the furthest south of Northern Virginia you can get. I remember meeting people from like Oakton or parts of there, and I'd tell them where I was from, and they'd be kind of like, oh, okay. Like, I just wouldn't be as, you know, worthwhile knowing, because I was from a smaller town area. So, you know, and there's instances like that, and also just stereotypes of what it's like to, you know, be from a rural area. And I think that, you know, one thing I love about writing is that you're able to get perspectives from different points of view. And so maybe you may not be from a rural area, but you could read these stories and you could find out, you know, just more about others. And you can see that it's, you know, completely different than what your expectations were. And, you know, today is like, you know, Indigenous Peoples Day. And we have a short story from the Nazagrok, Rainey Hobson in the book, you know, from Alaska. And I just think like, I have never read anything like that before. And I'm just, you know, and so just thinking like, even my own understanding has opened up of what a rural experience is.
Yeah, that's great, Vita. Thank you for bringing up that other story, especially on today.
Yes.
Nora, how about you?
Oh,
like,
gosh.
Did you wrestle with that kind of stereotyping? And I know your story kind of addresses that specifically, doesn't it?
It does. But I'll talk about something else, because I do. Well, one thing that I really love about the book is that everybody talks about, kind of gives these little anecdotes at the end of their real life experience, and so that's really cool too, to see like what everybody's been dealing with. But I have this really vivid memory of, I had just graduated college and I had my first like real job, and I was invited to this dinner party by my good friend, and it was, I only knew my friend, it was like her friends, and it was like a bunch of young professionals, and so I didn't know anybody, but I like to talk to people and, you know, like, you know, mingle and everything, and everything was going well. And then it came up, I guess somebody must have asked me like where I grew up, and it came up that I grew up in rural West Virginia, and like really rural, like less than 1,000 people. And then it came up that my husband also grew up in rural West Virginia, but in a different part of the state. We met at college. But the first thing that someone said to me, the stranger in front of like 20 professional people, was, you know, oh, is he your cousin? Like, and I remember it just, like, I wasn't surprised, you know, because we've all heard those jokes, and it's not just West Virginia, Arkansas, you know, whatever. But I was so mad, and then I actually, I just kind of tried to like shake it off or whatever, but everyone's laughing. Even my good friend who invited me, she like cracked up, and I was so embarrassed. And I was just, you know, I just kind of like tried to smile politely, and I was just like, oh, if you want to be my friend, don't ever say something like that again. And the whole table it was just like silent. Like it was so awkward. And it was like, you know, and then people were like, no, I didn't mean that. And this is why and like but I was never invited again to a party at that house. But it was like a real turning point for me, because it was the first time I think that I spoke up for myself as a rural person, because I really identified with what you were saying, Mary. I would just hide it, because as soon as somebody figured it out, it was a way for me to be looked down upon or ignored, and or, you know, made to be like a country bumpkin. And so yeah, like that really stuck with me. But I guess I did kind of think, these are all super smart people. Like they're all, you know, very liberal and, you know, accepting. And then like, they just so casually made it a joke like that. And, yeah, so that's just one of many, you know.
Yeah. And you're right. It's rural people are often an easy target. And unfortunately, you know, others don't always stick up for the rural person in the group. That was your experience, Nora, where hopefully these days, if somebody is mocked and othered in that way, hopefully somebody in the group would say something.
Well, and I think it's too, just not like, I know that person was not being malicious. Like they were not, you know, trying to make me feel bad, or like they really did think it was funny and like that I would laugh too. But, you know, I can see how they would think that without having been in my shoes, like having heard that joke, like, I don't know, 300 times up to that point, where it just is kind of like, okay, enough. And I mean, and goodness knows everybody deals with this kind of thing in different ways. But I just think so many people really don't know. And that's what I hope Rural Voices will kind of just, you know, open some eyes and show like that, yeah, people, like there's such diversity here, but also like rural people like have the same hopes and dreams and fears and problems as everybody else. And so I'm hoping that people can see both like what's special and beautiful and challenging about being from a rural community, but also what, you know, what they might have in common with those people.
Right. Thank you, Nora. And I was just going to say, we're getting close to our time when we're going to open up for Q&A. So I just wanted to make sure that Randy had a chance to talk a little bit about, you know, his experience, you know, whether this is something you had wrestled with, Randy. I know your story addresses that. And you also spoke about how as a teenager and, you know, in Brooklyn, your buddies would kind of mock you and say, oh, you're not really an artist, but that you rediscovered your artistic self. But anything else? And then Vita, we'll get to you. Okay. I know you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah, well, the question that you asked about was there a point where you ever felt like you needed to hide,
right?
You know, coming from this. Like I said, I was in the South for the first 4 years, then moved up to Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And in Brooklyn, I went to a school, a Catholic school called Our Lady of Peace, which was a really good school because this was like in the early 70s, right? And so the teachers there were really aware of what was going on in the politics at the time. They were aware of the civil rights movement. And in that school, there were about 2,000 people, and I was like one of 3 Black people in the school. But the teachers really tried to make me feel comfortable, to make me feel worth, and which was great. I mean, I always appreciate that from them. They were really great teachers. And I remember one time when I think I was in about 5th or 6th grade, one of the teachers was she started asking about breakfasts. what does everybody eat for breakfast? That was the thing for the class. What does everybody eat for breakfast? What do you eat for breakfast? So, you know, there were kids who were standing up. Oh, I've got ham and eggs. I've got mush. I've got this, right? And at that time, I was like in the back of the class. I was sort of like burying my head, saying, oh God, please don't ask me, you know, because at that time, you know, I ate this thing, which I really liked, which is called grits, right? And grits is like a hot oat meal, right? But, you know, nobody knew what the heck that was. So I'm sitting there and saying, oh, please don't call me. And of course she does, you know, and so then I sort of stand up in the class and he said, so what did you have for breakfast? What made you happy, big and strong? And I sort of I had some orange juice. Okay, that's good, orange juice. But what did you eat? What did you eat? Some toast, yes, and what else? Grits? And I remember the whole class turned on me. You know, and one of the kids followed up said, what the heck is that? And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to answer. The teacher also seemed a little flabbergasted. He said, oh, I guess that's like some kind of cereal? Yes, it's like a cereal.
Yeah.
Grits? Isn't that something like you feed like a chicken or something? And yeah.
Randy, yeah. I remember that trying to explain and telling people it was kind of like cream of wheat. People
right, exactly, yes.
But they didn't. Yes. They didn't always know grits.
Yeah. Yeah, so
great story. And Vita, you wanted to add a little something.
Right. So I have never been called white trash, obviously, because I am not white. But I was reading so Nora had us all write a little something at the end of the book, just kind of our experience. And I was reading David Gill's, why he, you know, his experience with World Voices and how he had a teacher call him white trash, and just the way he described it, I could feel that hurt. And, you know, just as a contributor, just reading that, you know, I learned something more about just the words we use. And, you know, people use that phrase as a joke all the time, where it's like, it's a very hurtful thing. And, you know, I'm glad we're having these kind of conversations so we could see that, you know, that stereotype, it's people use a joke, but it's a really hurtful thing. And I'm glad we have, you know, this experience that we can share with others. And I'm glad I learned, you know, about that too.
Yeah, thank you, Vita. That's an excellent point. And, you know, we all want to give a big shout out to David Gill. He's faculty at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and he wrote a very powerful story, a very, very moving story. I remember him reading that story out loud, and there was just silence afterwards. No one knew what to do. You couldn't clap. You know, we were just stunned. It is an incredible story. Well, you know, this has all gone so fast. I feel like I want to talk to you all for another half hour, but we have questions in the Q&A, and I guess it's time to segue to that. I know we also have a lot of writers that are part of the audience tonight, so you'll probably get lots of questions about craft, maybe like, what was your greatest craft challenge? And I'm going to segue to Q&A now, but I'm going to be the first one to ask a question. And so my question, and just very, very briefly, tell us the next thing that you're working on. Like, what are you working on now? Vita, go ahead. Okay.
Well, I am working on something I can't talk about, which is, I know. It's one of those things where you
that's always the case.
But it's this phrase that writers say that I get to say for the first time in my life, and it's, you know, it's exciting. I'm so excited about it, but I can't really share it. So,
okay. You know. Well, we'll look forward to it, whatever it is. It keeps our curiosity. Randy, how about you?
Well, I have several projects that are being worked on right now. There's a couple of proposals. One deals with the civil rights movement in the 60s. Another deals with an aviator from World War One, and another is an adventure story. And that's all I can say right now.
Randy, you are very busy, so we have a lot to look forward to from you. And Nora, I know you're always busy too. What are you up to?
Yes, well, I have two different projects right now that I'm working on. One of them, like Vita, I can't talk about it all. I'm sorry, I'm so excited about it. Hopefully I can talk about it soon. The other one, I'm working on another young adult novel, and all I can say about it right now is that it is set in rural West Virginia. And it is, well, that's all I'm going to say about it right now.
Well, this is great. This is my to be read pile then. I'll be waiting for these books. So we have a number of questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and just start to ask them. And some of them are addressed to specific folks. This first question is from someone that I think most of us know, Meg Cook. What was your favorite part about growing up in a rural community? And I think that just is a question for everybody. So just very quickly, Nora, what was your favorite part?
Oh, my favorite part. I think my favorite part was the bonds that I made with some super close friends that I had from, like, basically I still have a best friend that I've known since second grade. And then also the bond with nature. Like, I have like this intense connection with nature that I think is only because of where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Randy, how about you? What was your favorite part about growing up in a rural community?
Well, it's well, pretty much what Nora said.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's very simple. There were friends that I've met there that I mean, now it's been almost 30 years, and some of them have drifted off. But the last time I had been down to Tignall, I met some of the older people who knew me when I was a kid, and then hearing stories from them and talking to them and getting all of that reminded me, so much of what I found so special about it, and also too, I got to again talking about the nature, walking through the woods again, which is really great because, like, here I live here in Switzerland with my wife and boys, and where we are, like 10-15 minutes by tram, you're in the woods, and it feels like I'm coming home when I go there. I really feel close to it. And so yeah, as I said, what Nora said.
What Nora said. You got the woods again.
Yes.
What about you, Vita? What was your favorite part?
There's so much freedom. In that small town in Idaho where my grandparents lived, we could walk down the main street and buy ice cream cones, or I could flirt with like boys that came there during the summer, the tourists and stuff. And so there's just this freedom of being out, like Randy, you could just walk around and just be outdoors. And there's this freedom that you don't have really in the suburbs where you just can just walk anywhere, and just explore and just be who you want, to be in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Randy, this is a question from you, and it is from author-illustrator Gilbert Ford. So Gilbert asks, Randy, did you find the graphic novel, short story, or the Oh, now his question went away. Wait a second. No,
Good question.
it wasn't me, I promise. I didn't hit the wrong button. Did you find the graphic short story difficult to tell in a short amount of space? Do you see a longer graphic novel developing from your short story? Interesting.
That is a good question. No, I actually thought that the 20-page fit that we had for the story was perfect for this version of the story. Though as I was working on it, I did see ancillary stories popping out from it. There were other little stories that I said, oh, I could go this route, or I could go, a little bit more this way. So I mean, I do see that it could be stretched out to well, actually not even stretched out, but just it can grow out to a larger story. I think that there's so much in there to talk about, the characters and the situation, and so yes, that's my answer.
And Randy, you were talking about your first contribution to Nora about when you were small, like 3 or 4 years old, and your grandfather was such a big presence in your life. And so you did a novel or even a picture book. You could perhaps go back to that experience, which would be pretty cool.
Was this a question to me?
Oh, no, just a comment. But I'm just adding to your to-do list,
Oh, yes.
Not that you didn't have enough projects already, but now you have another one.
Thank you.
So this is a question from Shannon Takaoka. And Shannon, I apologize if I didn't pronounce your name correctly. With a last name like Quattlebaum, I'm very sensitive to that. Can you talk, and so Shannon asks, can you talk about some of the challenges specific to writing short fiction that are different than writing a novel? Okay, so here's one of those interesting craft-related questions. Differences between writing short fiction that are different from writing a novel. So I'm wondering if we could just go around and each person just answer one thing. Nora, how about you?
I actually feel in some ways that short stories are harder than novels because you have to achieve so much in such a short space. So like I had to my first draft, I threw out like the first 8 pages because I was just like, this is just not gonna work. So I think a novel usually has like an A-B structure, with those kind of threads. And like with a short story, you really have to pare it down to mostly the A with just kind of like a hint of a B to give it a little bit more texture. And that can be really challenging.
Yeah, thank you. Vita, how about you?
I think with short stories, you have to kind of jump right in. There's not much time to set up things like you would in a novel, like with the first few chapters. So you're just like, from the get-go, you go in. And so that's been, a good learning experience for me.
Yeah. How about you, Randy?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, the piece that I did, there was it just started off from that point where I'm coming off the train. I didn't have the space to set up the before that led up to this situation. But I do find the short story a lot of fun because of the fact that you have to pare everything down to basically, its essence and work the story from there. So it sort of causes you to rethink some things, to make them a little more concise and also too at times a bit more hard hitting in a very short amount of space. So I enjoy both. I enjoy both, but yeah, there is a different play, when you're dealing with a short story or a longer piece or more long form piece.
Yeah, it's a challenge to write short. It's a challenge to grapple with those short story rascals. And you know, just to tell a whole story, but concisely and still elegantly.
Yes.
So here's a question. This is from S. Van Zandt, maybe Sharon Van Zandt, and she says, I grew up in rural Mississippi, magnolia trees, giant thunderstorms, barefoot through the woods, but I have always hidden my roots too. My question is, how does your rural identity fit into your life now? Oh, very good question. Vita, why don't you start us off?
Okay. It's, you know, I grew up in the military. I lived in so many different places, but I think back to, you know, my grandparents who come from there, and that really grounds me because like they were such good people, and that you know, just affects how I want to be myself. And I think about how they would, my grandpa's the guy, like, you know, it is a stereotype, but he's a guy who would stop his car on the road and help anyone. And I feel like those are the kind of values I want to bring into my house, even though I don't live, you know, in those rural towns anymore.
Yeah, the sense that people know one another and care for one another.
Or even strangers, you know, they would just be like,
Yeah. Nora, how about you?
It's interesting. I had a very similar answer because what came to my mind immediately was kindness and like knowing how to relate to people like on a one-on-one level, because I remember I lived in DC for a while and then out in Northern Virginia, and I remember being kind of hit by the fact that like people didn't really look at you in the eye when they passed you on the street, you know, like very big city versus small town thing. And growing up in a rural place, everybody is really just, you know, helpful, and you look at people's eyes and you make contact with them when you're talking. And I think even living anywhere, stuff like that is just really helpful, like to make connections. And so I feel like that goes back to like how I was brought up. And I know my husband too, like he's from rural West Virginia as well, very different part of the state, but I can hear in his voice when he talks to some of his clients that he kind of switches into like this, his accent will come out because it makes people comfortable, and like he has a way of talking with people that like puts them at ease. And I think that is knowing it's great to be able to talk to like different populations speak differently, right? And it's really nice to have the advantage of knowing how to interact one-on-one or with people that are maybe like a little shyer.
Yes. And you know, just like with our conversation amongst ourselves, the same thing is happening with the Q&A. We have so many wonderful questions. We're not going to have time to get to them. So Randy, we'll just ask you to sort of finish out that last question there. And then I think it's time for Heidi to come back on and sort of say goodbye for politics and prose.
Oh, okay. Well, I would agree with what both Vita and Nora had said. I mean, the one of the things is one of my last projects. I was working with a gentleman, and it turned out he found out that I was from Georgia, and it really opened things up to in a much deeper level. He was, because at first when we met, he was very nice, you know, very, very considerate, but also a bit standoffish. And then during our conversation, and I forget, I said something about the South or Augusta or something, and then we started talking, and he said, "So where are you from?" And so I said, "Well, you know, I'm from Washington, Georgia," and I could see his face completely opened up then, and he said, "Ah, a good old boy, now from Georgia. It's good to see." And it really opened up the whole relationship. And that's the thing that I've also noticed, not just with the gentleman that I work with, but with other people too, who are from the South. Like when I was up in New York and I would meet somebody and at first they weren't sure, then they would hear, or I would say something and they said, wait, are you from the South, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, so am I. And it completely opens up the relationship. And that's something that I really like about it. That there's a camaraderie, between the people. So that's what I found really special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can really relate to that. What all three of you said. My husband and I were just visiting my parents, and they have their same place in rural Virginia. It's no longer rural. It's surrounded by other houses and land that's been bought up and developed. But just to go back, like just to be in that familiar landscape, like it just pulls you in, the smells and the rhythms of the seasons and the sounds of birds. I live in the city in Washington, D.C. now. We go back to visit my folks. It's like so much wildlife, so many birds. It's just amazing. Like the soundscape is just so different. So, well, this has been such a pleasure to be able to chat with you. I just loved having this chance to see you on screen and to hear you all talk about your stories and your experiences with Rural Voices. Nora, congratulations for putting together such an exciting anthology. And I know, there's opportunities to buy the book, and I wish there were more opportunities for people to ask questions. Darn it, we ran out of time. Hi, Heidi.
Hi, sorry. There's some great questions that we didn't get to. So thanks to everybody for, putting those questions in. And many, many thanks to our panel, to Nora, Vita, Randy, and Mary for joining us tonight and sharing your stories and your insights. If you go to the chat box, you can click on the link to buy your own copy of Rural Voices. So please do that. Again, thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. You can follow our Children and Teens Department on social media. The handle's posted in the chat as well. And you can also watch past events on Politics and Prose YouTube channel. And this will also be available to watch again. So feel free to share that widely. And everyone keep reading and expanding your world. Stay safe out there. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Margaret. Again, we so appreciate Politics and Prose hosting this virtual event.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, audience.